We aren't really sure why Jesus wanted to come to this side of the lake, but now we arrive in the region of Gerasa. This is a part of the area known as the Decapolis, 10 Gentile cities in loose alliance under Roman rule. Jesus is immediately confronted by a demon-possessed man. The man is naked. Down, boys. He is so prone to violent compulsions that even chains and leg shackles can't keep him controlled. He's excluded from the city and living among the tombs. These are the signs that people used back then to diagnose possession by an unclean or evil spirit. Since Luke does not give him a name, I'm going to call him Leroy. I grew up in the South where this is a common name. As usual, I used several commentaries in preparing this sermon. But one thing I noticed is that every one of them referred to Leroy as a demoniac, and that began to bother me. While it is accurate, it is a label, a way to categorize and pigeonhole this man. And when we place someone into a category, we begin to strip away the humanity of that person. This becomes a way to more easily constrain that person to preconceived ideas of how we think they will act. It is the beginning of oppressing them. The people of the town thought they were doing the man a favor by restraining him so that they could feed and clothe him. Their preconceived ideas may have been constructed by observation, and they may even have had good intentions, but their actions isolate and demean him. They strip away basic rights that others maintain for themselves. He becomes less human in their eyes. I think Paul has something like this in mind in our Galatians passage. In his day, there were 3 significant divisions of people, especially in the Jewish community. You were either Jewish or other. You were either free or other. You were either male or other. I don't think this last one has changed a whole lot today. Paul tells us that these labels are dissolved or set aside when we become Christian. If we see everyone else as Christ sees them, we are all the same. We are all in the image of God. We are all human beings. And that's how Jesus sees this man, not as a demoniac, not as someone unworthy of his attention, a human being just like him. When Leroy sees Jesus, he recognizes Jesus and demands to know what's going on between them. What does Jesus, the child of the Most High God, want with him? Then he begs Jesus not to torture him. Is this Leroy talking, or is it the demons? The man may not know where his identity ends and his possession begins. It is clear, though, that Jesus will not allow the unclean spirits to keep on tormenting Leroy. Even before they speak, Jesus commands the spirits to leave. When Jesus asks the man's name, the demons reply, "Legion, for we are many." Up to now, this story sounds pretty much like a simple healing miracle. But I think a small lesson in biblical history might help. From the year 68 to 72, there was what is called the Jewish Revolt. The Roman armies destroyed the Jerusalem temple during this time. Based on the evidence that we have, Mark's gospel was written before this, but all the other gospels are written at least 10 years later. If we keep that in mind, Luke has some background information that we might want to consider as we read his story. For people in the Roman world, legion had but a literal meaning, a unit of approximately 6,000 Roman soldiers, a little bit smaller than today's division. Since they are the occupying army, Maybe an exorcism has additional significance, and Luke's word choices suggest a closer look. When the man confronts Jesus, Luke uses a verb that is later used of armies meeting in battle. When the demon seizes the man, Luke uses a word used when Christians are arrested. The hand and foot chains are the same words used when the disciples are imprisoned. Luke paints an experience of living under a brutal, conquering empire that seeks to control all aspects of human life. The historian Josephus tells us that toward the end of the Jewish revolt, the Roman general Vespasian sent soldiers to retake this area, killing 1,000 men, imprisoning their families, burning the city, and attacking other villages. Many of those buried in these Gerasene tombs had been slaughtered by the Roman legions. When the legion of demons inhabiting Leroy encountered Jesus, they begged not to be sent back into the abyss. I find this rather an interesting request because the most prominent place I have seen the abyss mentioned is in the very beginning of the Bible in Genesis. In the beginning, when God was creating the heavens and the earth was formless, and darkness covered the face of the abyss, while the Spirit of God fluttered over the face of the waters. So this abyss in the formless earth was so terrifying that even the demons did not want to go back there. Rather surprisingly, Jesus grants the request and allows the demons to enter a herd of pigs instead. Now, Jews regarded pigs as unclean, so this reminds us again that Jesus is in Gentile territory. But it may have a political meaning too. One of the emblems of the 10th Fretensis Legion was a pig. The legion took part in destruction of Jerusalem, had the lead in retaking Palestine, and was stationed in Jerusalem during the war, or after the war. For the people of the area, pigs would have seemed a fitting place for legion. And now they promptly run into the water and drown. The swineherds, probably hired hands, see all of this and run to spread the news, probably fearing that they will be accused of doing something with the herd. Even today, pig farming is a profitable business in this part of the world, so the loss of the herd would certainly have had major economic impact on the region. When the people come back, the healed man is sitting calmly at Jesus' feet, wearing clothes, and apparently in his right mind. Strangely, after hearing how the man is now free of his demons, the people don't celebrate the good news. Instead, they were seized with great fear. Again, Luke uses a word describing a city under siege. Freedom is too dangerous and too costly. Even with Legion banished from Leroy, the memory of Legion still controls the community. But the people's fear seems more focused on the power that Jesus has demonstrated. So the people ask Jesus to leave. But before he goes, he commands the man to return to his home and tell everyone what God has done. Author Kathy Black explains, in biblical times, it was one's sense of being in the community that was most crucial, and illness or disability interfered with being in the community. This is where the healing is. He can be welcomed back into his community, and there he can tell his story about the awesome work that God is doing through Jesus. And even with Jesus absent, his impact ripples throughout the community, throughout the story, through the power of his story. The Roman attack on the city tells us the extent of those ripples. This whole story invites us to consider what Jesus has to do with the forces that possess and control us today. It challenges us to give greater thought to Jesus' authority over powers that destroy human life. How many people in our world are haunted by a traumatic past and tortured by those memories? This is not just a condition found in soldiers returning from war. I have friends who were abused as children and who have trouble relating to others, as most of us do. I knew someone who had been in so violent a car crash that she couldn't get into a car again. How many people are homeless and poorly clothed because of social and economic factors beyond their control, no matter how hard they struggle? I've had the blessing of spending time with some of them, and their stories can be truly heartbreaking. We see people who are consumed by addictions and don't know where their addiction ends and their own selves begin. We see people who are imprisoned behind bars of iron or of the mind and consider them as less than human, excluded, cast out. We see governments that separate people from their families, denying them the chance to look for better lives. We see occupying armies still brutalize entire communities and hold them captive to fear. Author Chris Sugden speaks to us. Being human should be sufficient reason for being treated with dignity. Sadly, some people, far from being respected, are considered to be living lives not worth sustaining. Jesus comes to challenge and exorcise every power, every demon that prevents us from living fully and freely as human beings created in the image of God. Jesus claims sovereignty over not just our souls, but over our very lives here on earth. Many among us resist this news, finding escape from our own legion too frightening, too demanding, and too costly. All my life I had heard how I was not just a sinner, but an abomination in God's eyes. I didn't feel that I was so bad, and most of the people who were saying this had no idea they were talking about me because I hid it. I felt pushed away from the church, even as I felt God calling me in. When I hit midlife, I timidly came back to the church. I ran across this passage in Galatians, and my eyes were opened. I'm not any different to God. Having been in a very dark place because of my own demons, this passage literally lifted my spirits. Actually, I think it saved my life. Just as Jesus told Leroy, I was welcomed back into the community and called to tell how much God has done for me through Jesus. To those whom Jesus has healed and freed, know that this liberating love is indeed good news. This is the gospel that he commands and empowers us to proclaim wherever we are through our story. This gospel shows that God is still at work in Jesus, bringing God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. Amen.